Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Ken Goldberg. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the Citrus Research Exchange. We are fortunate to have another great roboticist here today. I've known him for quite a while, so it's great to have him here. I want to welcome you and welcome everybody online who's tuning in. And I want to also remind you that because we're thinking about food and agriculture and all these good things, don't forget to put your lunch in the compost. So we go in and actually start being part of the future agriculture system. Next week, there will not be one of the regular series because we have a super big event going on, which is the Women in Technology Symposium, and the Athena Awards will be announced. It's going to be super, super cool. It starts in the morning, and I think at 11. And Lauren, do you know the timing next week? There's information on the back on the big Women in Technology. The first ever. It's going to be very lively. It's going to be right here in this room. We'll go from 11 to I think like 2 or 3. Lots of interesting talks, presenters, and it'll be it's going to be really inspiring. And it's not limited to women. So men, show up. And Tuesday, October 11th, I also want to note that there's going to be a pre-proposal writing workshop for the Big Ideas competition. So if you're interested in that, there's a lot of information online, Big Ideas at Berkeley, but the writing workshop is at 6 p.m. in Blum Hall, right next door. And you can also check out that online as well. Wait. So to give him the full amount of time, our guest today is Jim Ostrowski. He did his PhD in mechanical engineering at Caltech. Then he went on to become a faculty member at the University of Pennsylvania. He played a key role in evolution robotics. And then and now is a co-founder or VP of engineering at Blue River Technology, which is a new and very cool, exciting company, which we're going to hear about today. Please join me in welcoming Jim.
So thank you, Ken. Thanks for having me here. I figured what I would try and do is give kind of a sense of what we're doing at Blue River and a sense of kind of the field of agricultural robotics, which is kind of a new area that really is just starting to catch on and see a lot of activity. Just a quick run through. I'll just introduce the topic a little bit, talk about three areas that we've been working in and focusing on, and give some detail on that. One is lettuce thinning, and I'll describe what that means. One is more general weeding, and phenotyping or data collection on the physical characteristics of plants. So those are three of the key areas that we're working on. And I'll try and give you a flavor of what they are and what the technology challenges are and how we've been approaching it. To introduce things, though, the field of agriculture obviously has been around forever for humans, and how we deal with food and how we produce food. But there are some real strains on the system that are showing up right now. In particular, there's a need, and there are lots of different statistics that have been put out, but a need to increase output of farming. Some say up to 100% by the year 2050, so in the next 30 years, doubling the output capacity of agriculture. So that's a pretty monumental challenge for an area that tends to increase by 1 or 2% a year. There's also been significant labor shortages in agriculture. This is driven by both everything from costs to immigration laws to an aging workforce that's going in there, and I'll talk a little bit about that. In particular, one of the big challenges, and I'll talk a little about this more later, is increasing weed resistance to herbicides that are in use. And this is an area that we're really trying to key off of, is ways to both improve the efficacy of herbicides that are being used and also reduce the amount that are used. That's kind of our two big goals in getting into this area. And hopefully do that. In doing that, we start to get greener practices in terms of the herbicides that are used in other areas. I won't talk about water as much. That's also a really important area. I don't want to downplay that at all. But there has not been a lot of progress in how to use robotics in improving water situation, although Ken has been working on that. So I'm really excited to talk to him about that. Maybe before I jump into this, just to give you a real broad overview of some of the things going on in agricultural robotics, for those who aren't familiar with the area. I broke it into 4 categories. There's lots of ways to slice this, but effectively there's things that are working in structured environments. This is an example of harvest automation, which is moving around potted plants as they go through the different growth stages, so that they can automate that and just make it more efficient. There is a lot of work in autonomous vehicles, so just building a machine that can run through the field, pulling something behind it. Right? So the autonomy side of vehicles like tractors. Tractors do a lot with GPS already, but these are even more fully advanced where you don't need a driver at all. Then there's things like drones, and drones are being used in a wide variety of areas. This is an example of a Yamaha autonomous helicopter being used to spray. It's not gotten a lot of usage so far, but they've been building this since the 1980s. That's what it originally started. Actually, some people who may have worked with autonomous helicopters, it was originally developed as an agricultural robot for spraying herbicides. But then there's a number of companies also that are doing drones for data collection, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. And then maybe a final area is harvesting. And there's a ton of potential there. The biggest costs of agriculture generally go into harvesting. And it's one of the most complex and kind of interesting, especially from a research perspective, tasks that they have to tackle. Again, there haven't been a ton of commercial successes there. There are a couple companies, maybe call out, SRI just launched a company called Abundant Robotics that's doing apple harvesting. It's got this cool little suction device that just sucks the apples in as it goes and picks them. And then there's a couple other companies doing strawberry harvesting, but they tend to require fairly constrained environments. So this apple picking is one of the first examples I've seen that really seems to have a good approach for getting out in the normal fields that haven't been modified for the robots. And that's certainly a theme that we've really tried to tackle, is not requiring any modifications to the fields or to the way that the farmers practice their growing cycles. Just to give you maybe a little more flavor too about what the things that we think are really going to be impactful in this goal of increasing the yields, because productivity is going to be a real challenge over the next few decades as we look at improving agricultural yields. One, and I mentioned this already, is getting better data to the farmer, using drones or other things to collect data. Satellite imagery is being used also, but getting the right data to the farmer. Related to that is actually getting data to breeders, and this is an area that we've been working on. Right now, most breeding that they do, as they're doing seed breeding, is done very manually. So they plant crops, they go out, send usually a high school intern with a tape measure and a pencil and paper, and collect data on the crops. So it's a very manual effort, very inaccurate. So one of the things I'll talk about very briefly is just some work we're doing on data collection for breeders. Turns out to be a huge area of potential impact. And then lastly, plant care. And that's where a lot of our focus has really been on, in particular for weed control, but there's lots of potential areas there to have impact. So overall, our goal is to develop machines that are able to care for every plant. That's kind of a driving theme for us, is using technology to allow not this broad acre approach where you spray everything the same, treat everything the same, water everything the same, but to really hone down and figure out, okay, plant by plant, how can we do this? That's an extreme version, obviously. It may be that it's row by row or section by section. But so far what we've done is focused on utilizing computer vision to be able to actually detect and recognize every plant, figure out details about them, and react and act accordingly. And the goal being to increase yields, either by being able to make more plants harvestable or by packing more plants in. And we've been able to show you can do both of those. So let me jump into one of the first areas that we started on, and we evolved through a number of cycles. This came out of an MBA program where they were researching different potential ideas, and lettuce thinning is the topic that came out of that. So what is lettuce thinning? Lettuce thinning is basically going into planted lettuce and thinning out the crop. And what happens with lettuce is it doesn't germinate very well. So instead of planting, say, every 10 inches where they would like to plant, they have to plant every 2 inches. And because the germination's not very good, if they planted every 10 inches, they'd have these big gaps every once in a while. And so their stand count is what they call it. The number of plants they can harvest per acre goes down significantly. So instead, they plant every 2 inches or so, and then traditionally have used manual labor, hand labor, to go through and thin out the crops. And it can also be done for weeding and that sort of thing. So it's that same hand labor. So you have crews of somewhere between 40 and 80 people that are out there bent over all day long in the heat, just knocking out plants. It's a very slow operation. It's very difficult to get that labor out. In fact, that's probably the biggest challenge that growers face right now is labor shortages. They just don't have the people that they need, especially as they start to find competing challenges between harvesting crops and thinning and weeding crops. They just don't have the people. And with immigration laws becoming stricter, with the minimum wage going up, and with people getting older, in particular the average manual labor right now is about 45 years old. It's a huge problem for them. So we've attacked that problem. The core idea, again, with lettuce thinning, I just want to make sure to give you a sense of this, is I've got all these plants that are spaced very tightly, and I want to go through and get rid of plants in between. So it's a pretty straightforward task, really. And it's generally done, again, with a hoe. In fact, Cesar Chavez was one of the things that he developed was the long-handled hoe. So he's credited with introducing that. It used to be that it was a short hoe, and because they thought to get it accurate enough, you had to go and really bend over and be between every plant. So he introduced that as a novel technique. So this is kind of what it looks like after we've sprayed it, sprayed the plants, as you get a plant kept here, and dead plants in the middle. And this is what our sprays look like as they've been sprayed. We're able to do 1/4-inch precision, running at between 3 and 4 miles an hour. So very accurate sprays. Yes, of course.
Why you would kill the plants by spraying rather than just pulling them out?
Yeah, it's a great question. To get the speed. So to do this mechanically, no one's been able to do it mechanically above 1 mile an hour or so. And it tends to throw dirt around and cover plants. And so there are lots of problems with doing it mechanically. There are mechanical systems that work out there. But to get the speeds up and the accuracy, we found that we had the only option we've had is sprays. We've tested flames, electricity, lasers, and of course mechanical blades. But the only thing that can get the speeds high enough are spraying. And in particular, lettuce for us is kind of a stepping ground into bigger crops. Lettuce is it's a big crop. I mean, there's certainly a lot of lettuce grown. 75% of the lettuce in the U.S. is actually grown locally in Salinas Valley here. So it's been a really nice crop for us to start with, but we need to get to bigger crops, and that means faster speeds also. So these run somewhere between 3 and 4 miles an hour. As I mentioned, mechanically, it's about 1 mile an hour is your limit. We need to get up at 8, 10 miles an hour in order to actually have an impact in agriculture. So getting those speeds up is a crucial focus for us. Yeah, please.
So with respect to the germination,
Mm-hmm. Yes. So it's a great question, and interesting in a couple different fronts. So in terms of which plants are they independently germinating? So it turns out there's 2 things happening there. Yes, they each germinate independently, so they could potentially germinate. And this is anecdotal, I don't have hard evidence on this, but from the farmers, they tell us that having plants that are somewhat closely spaced together allows it to crack through the soil surface. And so they actually aid each other by having the plants closer. So they increase the germination rate by being closer. If you spread it out, then that's, again, where the germination rate drops. For us, how do we determine? We use a lot of different characteristics of the plant to determine which plants to keep and which to kill. And generally, most of them are healthy at this stage when we go in through and do thinning. But there are significant variations in size and color and shape that we use to distinguish which ones we want to keep and which ones we want to get rid of. Yes, and that's right. And so the desired target spacing, which is usually between 10 and 12 inches, is so that they can grow full heads of lettuce. Yeah. Yes? Mm-hmm. Let me get into that in just a second. Yeah. In fact, it may be. Well, no, I want to talk about something else. I'll come back to that if that's okay. Yeah. In particular, for lettuce thinning, we don't use herbicides, which is interesting. So we're using fertilizer, but I'll mention that in just a second. I wanted to just give a real quick kind of snapshot of the evolution of this product. I just thought it'd be interesting for people to see kind of where we've gone from kind of just a real rough prototype into a production system. And in particular, I think it's kind of nice to see it in the video. This will show you the machine working in action. This is real time for our first prototype machine. So this kind of gives you a sense of where we started. It really hacked up. It had a chair so someone could go and program while we were working on it. This machine is moving slow enough that we didn't actually have a driver in there. It would just kind of walk along the field by itself. Not autonomous in the sense that I'd like to admit. This is showing some of the sprays. You'll see sometimes like a big mist clouding out, so we had to really work hard on getting the spray accuracy up so that when I say quarter-inch spray accuracy, it really means we're spraying within a quarter-inch and we're not dusting the rest of the plants. So that was a paltry 0.05 acres per hour. Kind of our next generation system was this. That's right. Yeah, so I probably did this a little bit out of order, but yes, the chemical is a fertilizer. So it's an AN20-based fertilizer that, if you're familiar with fertilizers, it's a high nitrogen content fertilizer. It turns out that for young plants that are this stage, if you spray fertilizer directly on the leaves, it burns it down. So what turns out, this is a kind of really cool trick that we're able to play, is we spray fertilizer on these baby young plants, kill them, and then leave the fertilizer for the rest of the plants. Yeah. Right, exactly, yes. And it will, I mean, so certainly that spray, if it mists over and gets on the plants we want to keep, will kill them, especially in hotter weathers. But yeah, that's right, we get a boost. And it's kind of nice, if you look at our spraying versus other systems, you'll see them perk up with that little bit of fertilizer. This is as we got a little more advanced, and you can see now it's feeling more real. This is still a couple generations back. That's going at 2.5 miles per hour, which is about 3 acres per hour. For context on that, a single person can do about an acre in a day. Okay, so that'll give you kind of a rough ballpark. So we've gone about a 60-fold increase by this time, and then this is basically our current version running slow at a relatively slow speed. I think it's about 2.5 miles per hour. But even at this speed, it becomes hard to follow along and keep up with the machine. And that's an important aspect, actually, is that how do you know when this machine's doing good work? And I'll revisit that in just a second. But yeah, so this machine's running somewhere around 2.5 miles an hour, maybe 2.7. Yes. No, please. This is great. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not that much bigger. I mean, yeah, so there is obviously a global market for lettuce, but it's. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, sorry. So what you see here is about a 75-fold increase. Obviously, it was a pretty easy baseline to get better than, but we've really kind of cranked that up, and right now we're running about 50% faster even than the machine that I showed you there. So it's kind of fun to see. It's a very modular machine, just to give you some idea of this machine. I've talked about that we're spraying fertilizer on the plants to kill them. Each machine ends up evaluating, kind of keeping about 1 million plants a day. So it gives you a sense of how many plants we're talking about here. And we have 6 of these machines that are out in the field. They operate every day, pretty much Monday through Saturday, kind of agricultural hours, agricultural times. And the farmers just bring us in. We operate it ourselves as a service, which has been a great way to learn about the problems that are there, to be able to fix them in the field. If you're starting a system up and you want to deploy it, I highly recommend operating as a service if you can. Just wanted to dive a little bit into our vision system, give you a sense of how it's working. It's got a RGB camera, just a basic color camera. We have to process somewhere around 5 to 10 hertz in order to keep the speeds that I've been talking up. And it uses a support vector machine. So an SPM it's pretty basic. Well, I shouldn't say basic. It's a relatively advanced tool, but not state-of-the-art in terms of classifying plants and detecting weeds. I'll show you just another example of it. It's a little blurry, I apologize, but there's kind of a weed here and the plants here, all in a row, because they plant in rows, obviously. We first do what we call a binarization step, where we detect plant matter and identify and classify the plant centers and reject the weeds, and then do some classification on the plants to see which ones are healthy and which ones we want to keep or kill, and then decide where to spray. So this is kind of, these are our spray bands, if you will, on the system, and then spray. And you can see this is kind of, these dark bands are showing where the spray actually landed. And that's from a secondary camera. So we actually have two cameras in our system, one that detects the plants and one that detects the sprays. And I mentioned detecting the sprays because this is one that I can't stress the importance of enough in terms of trying to build a machine that you can deploy at scale. And it's how do you keep that machine to be robust so that it's not destroying the crops. You know, we're taking action in the field now. It's not like we're just collecting data and there's no harm, no foul if you do something wrong. In this situation, we are spraying these plants, and so we're going through these fields, which I mentioned kind of our current rate is about 5 acres an hour. A lettuce field, value of a lettuce field is about $10,000 an acre. So you can very easily do about $50,000 of damage an hour. And our machines get beat up. They have the sticky syrup kind of fertilizer going through. It's not syrup, but sticky fertilizer going through. This is an example where these two lines, these two white lines, are supposed to be collinear. They should be lined up. But this thing got beaten up. It got hit, and so they got knocked off. And so now you can imagine if I'm trying to spray within a 1/4 inch and a little bit of variation is going to kill the plant I wanted to keep, this is going to be a showstopper. So we put in a secondary camera to do self-monitoring and self-calibration. And it looks something like this. So we go through the same process, identify the plants, we spray, and now we identify where those spray lines were. And that allows us to feed back through the system. It allows us to kind of say, hey, how are safety margins on the plants as we detect those spray bands? And it also allows us to do self-calibration. So we're actually able to go through in real time and say, all right, this sprayer is getting a little sticky or it got bent a little bit, and adjust the spray, the timing of the sprays. So we've gone from where we used to have errors where every day you'd have to kind of recalibrate the system to where it just self-calibrates, and now it works all by itself. So it's been a really nice step. Okay, and I know I'm probably going to be running short on time, so I apologize if I run through these things quickly. I wanted to turn to weeding. That's kind of our big focus right now, is moving towards more general weeding, in particular for not only for lettuce but also for row crops like cotton and corn and soy. So that's been a big area. One of the things that's happened with agriculture is it's gone through this evolution of practices. And obviously, a long time ago it was hand tools, but more recently we started to see the use of mechanized tools like tractors that have really changed agriculture. Even more recently, so as we get closer, the different chemistries are used for chemicals for fungicides, insecticides, herbicides. And then most notably, even more recently with the advent of genetically modified crops, it's tying those two together. So using GMO crops that are paired with herbicides in order to spray broad acreage and to be able to harvest, to raise and harvest even more crops. So that's led to a boom in production, agricultural production. They can do many more acres, but at a cost. And this is an example of a broadcast application of a herbicide over the top of a crop. So they run these machines at somewhere between 12 and 20 miles an hour, 90-foot, even 120-foot wide booms, and they just douse the field. And things like Roundup, you're probably familiar with. So there are chemicals like Roundup that they spray over the top of these crops to fight mostly different pests, but mostly weeds. Also, obviously, for getting rid of insects and things like that. And the downside of that, like most people are probably familiar with this, although a good analogy, if you're not, is antibiotics, overuse of antibiotics that have led to super-resistant super-resistant germs, bacteria. With the same thing we're having in weeding is that this overuse of things like Roundup or glyphosate has caused these resistant weeds to pop up. And so these are starting to become more and more prevalent, more and more costly in agriculture production. So this is 1995, I just kind of stepped through. By 2005, these are kind of where they're finding instances of herbicide-resistant weeds. And the redder the color, the more types of weeds they're finding. In 2015, it was already like this. So you can see a lot of the Midwest, and in particular southern states, are really hit hard by these weeds. And there's no good solution for that. We're meeting farmers who, especially in Mid-South, who are basically just disking under their cotton fields and saying, I give up. I can't beat these weeds, and I don't have chemicals that can do it. It takes too much labor to try and do it. So this is where, at least we're trying to position ourselves, is kind of the next stage of this evolution of technologies, bringing in the digital age to this. They call it precision agriculture is one way of describing it. But basically taking the ability to identify plants, identify weeds, and spraying just the weeds. And we can spray different chemicals that way, so we don't have to broadcast spray across the field. We can spray individual herbicides targeted for specific weeds that will address and kill those weeds. So what we're targeting is this, basically it's a $25 billion a year herbicide industry. That's kind of a very big number across lots of different crops. We're starting out focusing on cotton and trying to target this idea that right now farmers are really constrained. They've got kind of just a couple herbicides that work in this broadcast method. So we want to use what we call see and spray, see the plants and spray the ones we want to give them a total range of herbicides that they can use. So they can use herbicides that they wouldn't be able to spray because they'd kill their crop, but now just spray it only on the weed and not over the whole field. And our goal and what we're seeing is that we should be able to spray much, much less herbicide, right? We're only spraying on the weeds. So we reduce drastically the amount of herbicide that gets used. For the folks that do computer vision in the room, we are turning to deep learning for this. And it's been a really powerful tool for being able to identify crops and in particular distinguishing between crops and weeds. So we've started with convolutional neural nets. We're using this SSD, which has really good, so far, 90 to 95% detection rates and can run almost at the speeds we need. So we're getting very close. There's a lot of work being done here, and this is probably one of our biggest challenges, especially because if you really look at it, we need to have detection accuracy in how we characterize plants, probably above 99%. It's got to be much higher than most systems typically have, because if we identify a crop incorrectly, we're going to kill it, and if we leave weeds, that does them no good, right? So the rates at which we have to identify plants is really high compared to a lot of computer vision systems. And it has to run in real time. We're running in real time on embedded hardware. So it has to run in real time in something that is inexpensive enough. I can't put a K80, a big GPU stack on my machine on every row. So I have to have something that will run cheaply. The other thing that has been interesting for me as we explore this area is computer vision in many ways is becoming more and more about data management. So it's about how do I bring in lots of data, get it labeled, store it, get it cut in different ways so that I can train these systems. It's not about tuning specific features and details. It's about changing the architecture of the system. This is an example system. And then working on how you get the data. And we're fortunate we have access to fields. So we have access to all these different fields. And because we run as a service, in particular right now, we can collect data off these machines anytime we want. So our data access is fantastic. And this is just an example this is actually from lettuce, so this is not cotton, but where we've got a lettuce plant and we've trained the system with a very small data set, actually, only a couple thousand images, and ask it to identify the lettuce plant and identify all these different weeds. And these are different types of weeds, purslane, pigweed. There's lots of different weeds. And so it's right now doing a very good job, and even being able to detect kind of these plants that overlap and deciding which one belongs where. So there's some cool results that are coming out of this, again, with a lot of work still to do. Okay, so then let me turn to the last piece, and this is going to sound, I think, very disjoint at first, and I'll try and tie it together. There's another area that we've been working on, which is called phenotyping. And I mentioned this early on about breeding. One of the challenges with breeding is how do I collect data on my crop, on the new seed varieties to make improvements, right? So I breed different strains of a particular variety together, and so I've formed some kind of new hybrid, and I want to test it out. Right now, it's just they go out and plant it, and they go out with a clipboard and measure it, but it's very subjective. It's very time-intensive. So one of the areas that we've really gotten into is this idea of phenotyping. And we've built a couple different systems. One is tractor pulled that goes over corn plants when they're relatively young, still only a couple feet high, and can identify individual plants, their height, their leaf area, all these different measures. And you feed that back into your breeding program, and you can say, okay, this particular variety that came out of it is doing better than anything else, and measure that all the way through yield measurements. And then we've also been working on a drone system that's able to produce height measurements. We're able to produce, again, proxies for things like how leafy the plant is, how green and healthy it is, that sort of thing. And so we've got some of the first results coming out of that. This is a orthomosaic image. So this is captured from a drone that's flying at 15 meters above the crop. Right? This isn't a satellite image, which it kind of looks like. This has actually been manufactured from over 1,000 images tiled into this mosaic. That gives you about a centimeter resolution on images. So you're able to get very detailed data, whereas most satellite imagery for this type of measurement is on the order of a meter per pixel. We're talking about on the order of 1 to 2 centimeters per pixel. So you got very detailed images. We're also doing near infrared, which gives you a lot of information about plant health. Maybe just to zoom in, you can see this is just a zoomed in, kind of taking this area and zooming in. Shows you a lot of detail. And also, we've got really good registration with our near-infrared camera. So this is near-infrared, and I'll just toggle back and forth for a second so you can kind of see really nice registration between the two, which allows us to line it up and give different plant health indices, which is an important part of understanding how the crop is doing. And this is just all done on an automated drone. This is probably too detailed, but basically just saying we've done some ground truthing and show really nice kind of registration and kind of accuracy as we're taking our drone measurement versus hand measurements and field measurements. So our R-squared is on the order of 99%, 0.99. So great accuracy in terms of what we're actually collecting in data. And so I mentioned that's a little bit disjoint from doing weeding, right? But what we're trying to do is tie this into actually this notion that we're measuring every plant and getting information on every plant. So these drones are able to collect high-resolution imagery, measure detail about plants. The nice thing about the drones is they can get in at times when the tractor can't, right? As these plants get bigger and bigger, you don't want to run a tractor through it. But they can't take much action, right? And so we're able to take a lot of action and a lot of different types of things we can do with a tractor-based system and then come back and measure it with the drone. So our tractor is able to do see and spray, and what we'd like to do is not only see and spray from this idea of herbicides, but also nutritional things. You can put foliar nutrients in to help certain plants catch up if they're lagging behind. You can put insecticides, fungicides in, but how do you determine what the rate is, right? So traditionally, that's a very long, slow process. You have to spray this field and see how it pans out, and maybe do it all at one rate. For us, we can go through and test all these different things, but do it in just patches and vary the rates as we go through the field, and then come through later with a drone system and know through GPS tagging kind of what's happened in each of those areas. So it allows us to iterate and do all these very different experiments very quickly that allows us to vary the rates and learn what the best thing to do for the crops is. So really, this is kind of still far out there, but it's really exciting to me to be able to tie all these things together. I was debating whether I'll make a pitch, and we are hiring. We're always looking, and in particular for computer vision folks, software folks. I don't know if we'll have any agronomists in the audience, but looking for good agronomists as well. And that's it. That's it. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Hmm. Right. Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. So in many ways we don't, right? So you're absolutely right. We get this 2D view of what's going on, unless we've got some systems you can pull in that look from the side. But in general, most of our effort is as a 2D view. But what you do is more indirectly measure that. So when you have things like fungus and insects that are attacking the plant, that generally shows in the state of the plant. The other areas are things like drought, right? So drought tolerance is a really key area that people are studying. All of those things express themselves different ways in the plant. And in particular, as you look at not only the color spectrum, but also the different bands of infrared, you get a ton of information about the health of the plant. In particular, as the drought stress is one of the biggest ones that you can see very clearly by using infrared and comparing it to the color spectrum, how the plant's doing. But a lot of these things, health, whether it's not that we're directly measuring, we're not looking for insects, but you indirectly measure it through the plant health. Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah. No, yeah.
Overall business model, are you attempting to produce, in the long run, equipment that you can sell to agriculture all over the world, or are you attempting to maintain a service orientation?
Right. No. Our business model is we will do service where it makes sense and sell where it makes sense. And when you talk about the scales that you're talking about around the world, even across the country, we don't see any way in which we could scale to that. It's been really nice for lettuce because it's very compact where it's grown. And so service model has been perfect. And again, I was kind of trying to mention this because it's one of those pieces that I've learned firsthand, and so it wasn't obvious to me up front, is that a service model is great it's great margins, but it's also fantastic for development. Right? You're in there all the time. You're learning your mistakes all the time. You're making changes and correcting them all the time. And so as a way of getting started as a business, it's been fantastic. But absolutely, sales is the route that we have to go. And so the target here and the challenge is to be able to do something that you can sell at the right price that farmers can use. One of the big constraints actually with these seasonal crops like corn and cotton and soy is they have a very finite window in which it's grown, in which they can operate. So there's probably only a 3-month growing season for most of these, and they get a lot of rain during that, and so you can't put the tractor through during rain. So you've got these windows where you get to go in, and it means that although you could think of a robot that could move very slowly and do this over time, the machines tend to have to go and do thousands of acres a day even. This won't do 1,000 acres a day, but the farmers have to do thousands of acres a day in order to get through all their crops. So the machines have to operate really fast. We're killing some weeds with fertilizer right now, but that's not our main goal. Our main goal is to kill the plants. We will be killing weeds with pesticides, yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah, we debate this back and forth, all the time. It's kind of what should we target? The organic market is tiny compared to commercial, to the non-organic or commercial grain market in particular. So it is true that there's more money in there in terms of they're making more money, so there's more money to invest in weeding. But the total market size is a fraction of the other market size. A lot of these things are not even they're not things we eat directly, right? These are grains. They're used for biofuels. So a lot of the corn in particular doesn't show up in a store. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Okay. That's us. Yeah, that is us. Yeah. I'm very familiar with that. Yeah. 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 Right, yeah, and I think that it's been really nice that way, the way it's evolved, and we do have a little bit of this existential crisis, right? Are we a green company or blue river company is where the name came from. You don't want your rivers to be green. So blue river was how it came up. You want something that is good for the environment, but at the same time something that's commercially viable or successful. And I think where I tend to net out on that is one of our main goals is to reduce herbicide usage. Again, if you get a 90% reduction in herbicide, to me that's a big win, as well as being more effective over the long haul. The second piece that I think becomes really interesting for us is not jumping immediately to organics, but jumping to conventional crops. And by conventional, I mean non-GMO. So the thing about non-GMO crops is that you talk about organic, and there's kind of a price margin there. Going from GMO to non-GMO, they pay about $500 a bag for seed, a premium, that they could just then convert over into other things. So if we can crack into that market and just shift the mentality, shift the way agriculture is done from more GMO-oriented to conventional-oriented crops, that also is a huge win. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Mm. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but let me answer part of it at least. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Ah, yes. Yeah. So unfortunately, it's because the previous generation had weeds, right? And those weeds produce seeds, and they propagate. And so weedy fields tend to propagate to weedy fields. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's directly answering what you're saying. I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting for us is the different ways that the machine learning can be utilized to spread to other things. I mentioned these experiments, and I think that type of feedback is what's going to be really interesting as we go beyond just weeds, but also to other crops, other applications even. Yeah.
Joe, I'm curious if when you're doing both the inspection and the pruning,
Mm-hmm.
do you ever come across a particularly healthy practice,
Say, yeah, I wish we could keep this and make them all look like this.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
interesting. Yeah.
Wow, these are interesting. And then even you can just flag them with GPS and the farmer or someone can go out and look at them.
Right. I think probably not. And for me, I distinguish between kind of the commercial application and then the breeding side. And for me, it's the breeding side where that absolutely is happening, right? They're putting all different varieties in there, and they're wanting to know exactly that question. Is like, where are the ones that just jump out and survive drought and survive chemicals and do all this thing? So I think there is a focus on that side of it. In particular, where we are, there's not that much variation. And I'm not sure it would be that useful at that stage, for especially for lettuce. What's going to be interesting, I think, is the other way around, is like finding the weeds that are resistant, really isolating those weeds that are crazy good for, as weeds are, and then knowing, what chemicals work there, what actions have to be taken. And again, maybe that's also flagging a GPS to say, hey, you've got a really bad problem in this area. You probably need to treat it manually or go back and do a second dose or whatever it is. Yeah.
So for all of your services within the
Mm-hmm.
phenotyping, how generalizable they are, or if they're applicable to specific crops?
So thinning is pretty much just lettuce, and that's one of the reasons that we needed to move on from that. Most other plants, vegetable crops, they call them specialty crops, are transplanted. So they'll grow it in a nursery and then transplant it out in the field. Lettuce, for whatever reason, doesn't transplant very well, so they still continue to thin it. It's been interesting. There have been a number of of farmers who have been talking to us about going back and taking transplant crops and overplanting them the way they do lettuce because they have this option now. In the past, it's been this big manual effort to thin them out. It used to be that broccoli, cauliflower, I know I'm forgetting, other crops were actually grown, overplanted this way. So in terms of thinning, it's just lettuce. In terms of weeding, I think what we're finding so far, but we're really early on in this, is that the visual systems that we're working with, classification type systems, translate pretty well, but they need their own data sets, right? I can't just take something trained on lettuce and work with cotton. Maybe that's obvious, but surprisingly, though, with a little bit of data, I can take young lettuce and treat larger lettuce with that and do pretty well. It's going to be better the more, this is a data management thing again, the more data, the better, right? It's always going to get better, but there is some transference there. And most of what we're training on, I've been so stunned by the results because we literally have taken just a couple thousand images, gotten them labeled, and it's a fraction of what we've got. We've got hundreds of thousands of images. Transfer, learn from some basic networks that are out there, and gotten really good results. Spraying is the other piece. So I think in general, spray, we've found that we have to get more and more accurate and reduce there are two things that kill you with spraying. One is called drift, where the spray kind of mists out and drifts over, and the other is bounce, where it bounces off the ground or plants. So we've really targeted that as a primary area of effort. It's not quite as interesting and sexy as computer vision, but it's really one of our bigger challenges. That and then the reliability. Yeah.
For your drone measurements and mapping, are you using your own software or an existing solution?
So the drone data collection, flight, navigation, all that is commercial, so stuff we've bought. All of the orthomosaicing, where we stitch the images together, where we identify, look at different indices, look at, we're doing stand counts, so plant counts, plant measurements, that's all our software. Yeah. So it's kind of like we just assume the collection platform is given to us, and obviously it takes a ton of work to make that actually work in practice, but yeah, it's basically, it's a sensor for us, and then we take everything from there. And we've got, it's a really nice platform. I mean, I've been very happy with how it's come out. We've got LiDAR data for plant height. We've got RGB images, color images. We've got infrared images. We've got thermal images that I didn't show, which is really important for plant stress, drought stress and things like that. And then we're actually probably adding a hyperspectral imager in next year. So a lot of data. And that's going to be the fun part, right? We're just cracking the tip of the iceberg for the amount of data that we're working with. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.